Did you know that in 2025, the US is facing the largest wave of illegal immigration in history? Just last year, over 3 million migrants crossed the southern border, shattering all previous records. That's nearly the entire population of Chicago entering the country in just 12 months. And guess what? The numbers are still rising. Border facilities are overwhelmed. Cities are struggling to provide shelter, and the system completely broken. But here's the real shocker. This crisis isn't just about border security anymore. It's affecting the economy, public services, national security, and even local communities in ways most people don't realize. So why is America's immigration crisis spiraling out of control in 2025? And more importantly, how bad can it really get? In this video, we're breaking down the 10 biggest reasons behind this crisis, from record-breaking crossings to government inaction, and we're counting down from number 10 to number 1. So make sure you stay till the end, because by the time we get to the number 1 reason, you'll see exactly why some experts are calling this the most urgent crisis in modern American history. Number 10. Record-breaking border crossings. America's southern border is seeing the highest number of illegal crossings in history, and the numbers are only getting worse. In 2024 alone, over 3 million migrants crossed into the U.S. illegally. To put that into perspective, that's more people than the entire population of Nevada entering the country in just 1 year. And here's where things get even more alarming. Border officials are overwhelmed like never before. Detention facilities are packed beyond capacity, with some holding nearly double the number of people they were designed for. In certain areas, officers are forced to release migrants into the U.S. because they simply don't have enough space or resources to process them properly. This surge in crossings isn't just a logistical nightmare, it's a humanitarian crisis. Families, many with young children, are risking their lives to make the dangerous journey. Smugglers and cartels are taking advantage of the chaos, charging desperate migrants thousands of dollars for a chance to cross. Some don't survive. Others are trafficked. And those who do make it? Many end up in overcrowded shelters or living on the streets of major U.S. cities. So, what's causing this historic surge? Some blame weak border policies. Others point to rising violence and economic collapse in countries like Venezuela, Haiti, and Guatemala. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. The U.S. is struggling to keep up with the flood of migrants, and there's no sign of it slowing down. And if you think this is bad, wait until you hear about the next problem, a completely broken asylum system that's making this crisis even worse. Number 9. Strained asylum system. America's asylum system is on the brink of collapse, and it's only making the immigration crisis worse. Right now, there are over 2 million pending asylum cases, the highest backlog in U.S. history. Some migrants wait 5 to 7 years just to have their cases heard. And while they wait, many are released into the U.S., allowed to live and work with no guarantee they'll ever be deported, even if their claims are denied. But here's the shocking truth. Many migrants know how to game the system, but some are coached by smugglers or activists to say the right things to claim asylum, even if they don't actually qualify under U.S. law. Once they file a claim, they're often allowed to stay while their case drags on for years, making it nearly impossible to remove them later. Meanwhile, the sheer volume of cases is overwhelming judges and immigration officers. Many courts are handling thousands of cases at a time, forcing some judges to make decisions in just a few minutes. The result? A system that's completely dysfunctional, with legitimate asylum seekers stuck in limbo while fraudulent cases clog the process. Cities across the U.S. are feeling the impact. With nowhere to house new arrivals, places like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles are turning hotels into migrant shelters, straining local resources and angering residents. So what happens when an already broken system is pushed beyond its limits? It leads to something even worse. Criminal networks stepping in and exploiting the chaos. And that's exactly what's happening now. In the next section, we'll expose how human trafficking and cartels are thriving because of America's immigration crisis. Number 8. Increased human trafficking and cartel activity. The immigration crisis isn't just about border crossings, it's also fueling one of the largest human trafficking operations in the world. Right now, criminal organizations and cartels are making billions of dollars by smuggling desperate migrants across the border. Some pay as much as $10,000 per person for a dangerous journey that could cost them their lives. But here's the dark reality. Many of these migrants never reach safety. Instead, they fall into the hands of traffickers who exploit them for labor, sex work, or ransom. Women and children are especially vulnerable, with reports showing that over 60% of female migrants are sexually assaulted along the journey. And for those who can't pay the smugglers, some are forced into debt slavery, working for cartels just to survive. The problem doesn't stop at the border. Once inside the U.S., trafficking networks continue to operate in major cities, hiding victims in plain sight. Law enforcement agencies are struggling to keep up, as cartels have become more sophisticated, using encrypted apps, safe houses, and even American businesses to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, drug cartels are taking full advantage of the chaos. With border security stretched thin, cartels are smuggling record amounts of fentanyl into the U.S., fueling the deadliest drug crisis in American history. In 2024 alone, fentanyl overdoses killed over 70,000 Americans, and experts say it's only getting worse. So why isn't the government cracking down on these dangerous networks? Because political gridlock is stopping any real action. And that brings us to the next reason why America's immigration crisis is out of control: a government that simply can't agree on what to do. Number 7. Political gridlock and inaction. If you're wondering why the immigration crisis keeps getting worse, here's your answer. Washington is completely paralyzed. For years, Democrats and Republicans have been fighting over immigration policy, but instead of real solutions, we get endless debates, executive orders that get reversed, and zero long-term reform. Right now, Congress is deeply divided. One side pushes for stricter border control, mass deportations, and tighter asylum rules. The other side argues for more legal pathways, amnesty, and protections for undocumented immigrants. The result? Nothing gets done. Instead of fixing the system, politicians use immigration as a political weapon, blaming each other while the crisis explodes. And when Congress fails to act, the president steps in. Over the years, immigration policies have swung wildly with every new administration. One president tightens the border, the next loosens restrictions. This constant back and forth has created a chaotic and inconsistent system that encourages more illegal crossings. Migrants know that if they time it right, they have a better chance of staying. Meanwhile, state governments are taking matters into their own hands. Some states are defying federal immigration laws, declaring themselves sanctuaries where illegal immigrants are protected from deportation. Others are sending busloads of migrants to cities that claim to be welcoming, creating national headlines and even more political conflict. But while politicians argue, border agents, cities, and everyday Americans are the ones suffering. Resources are running dry, law enforcement is overwhelmed, and taxpayers are footing the bill. And the longer this gridlock continues, the worse the situation gets. So what happens when millions of migrants arrive in cities that can't afford to support them? The next section exposes the huge strain on social services that's pushing many communities to the breaking point. Number 6. Overburdened social services. America's immigration crisis isn't just a border problem anymore. It's now a citywide emergency in major urban areas across the country. With record numbers of migrants arriving daily, local governments are struggling to keep up, and the result is a massive strain on social services. Right now, cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles are spending hundreds of millions of dollars just to house and feed migrants. Homeless shelters are at full capacity, and in some cases, local governments are turning hotels, schools, and even airports into emergency housing. In New York City alone, the migrant crisis is expected to cost taxpayers over $12 billion by 2026, and that number keeps climbing. Healthcare systems are also feeling the pressure. Hospitals and clinics already struggling with staff shortages are now seeing an influx of migrants needing urgent medical care, often without insurance or a way to pay. This puts extra stress on emergency rooms, leading to longer wait times and higher costs for everyone. And then there's education. Public schools are overwhelmed as thousands of migrant children enter classrooms without speaking English, requiring special language programs, extra teachers, and more funding. Resources that many school districts simply don't have. Taxpayers are footing the bill, and frustration is growing. Some cities are raising taxes or cutting services just to manage the crisis, while others are begging the federal government for help. But with political gridlock in Washington, solutions aren't coming fast enough. So, what happens when migrants keep arriving but resources run out? The economy starts to feel the impact. And that's exactly what's happening now. In the next section, we'll break down how mass migration is reshaping the American job market. Number 5. Economic disruptions. America's immigration crisis isn't just stretching social services, it's also reshaping the economy in ways no one can ignore. With millions of new migrants entering the workforce, the U.S. job market is experiencing massive shifts, and not everyone is benefiting. On one hand, businesses, especially in industries like construction, agriculture, and hospitality, welcome the influx of workers. Many migrants are willing to take low-wage jobs that Americans often avoid, helping to fill labor shortages in key sectors. But on the other hand, this sudden increase in available labor is driving wages down, making it harder for many American workers, especially those in blue-collar jobs, to compete. And it's not just about jobs. With so many new arrivals, the cost of living is rising in many cities. Housing shortages are getting worse as demand skyrockets, leading to higher rents and pushing low-income families out of their neighborhoods. Meanwhile, small businesses are struggling to keep up with the rising costs of providing services to a rapidly growing population. At the same time, there's the question of who pays for all of this. Many migrants work off the books, meaning they don't pay taxes, yet still rely on public services like healthcare, education, and housing assistance. This puts more pressure on taxpayers, leading to growing resentment and political tension. And here's where things get even more complicated. Some states are fighting back against federal policies. The immigration battle isn't just between political parties anymore. It's now a war between state and federal governments. In the next section, we'll dive into the conflict between sanctuary cities and immigration enforcement, and why it's making the crisis even worse. Number 4. Sanctuary cities versus federal enforcement conflicts. America's immigration battle isn't just happening at the border. It's now a full-blown war between states and the federal government. The rise of sanctuary cities has created a massive conflict, where local officials refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, making it nearly impossible to enforce immigration laws. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco have declared themselves sanctuary cities, meaning they won't help federal agencies deport undocumented immigrants, even if they have criminal records. These policies were meant to protect migrants, but critics argue they're encouraging illegal immigration and making law enforcement's job impossible. Here's how it plays out. Federal immigration officers identify undocumented immigrants for deportation, but when they ask local jails to hold them, sanctuary cities refuse. Instead, migrants are often released back into the community, even if they were arrested for crimes. This has led to violent offenders being freed, only to commit more crimes, fueling public outrage and political division. At the same time, states like Texas and Florida are fighting back. In a bold move, Texas has begun busing thousands of migrants to sanctuary cities, saying, if you want open borders, you can deal with the consequences. This has overwhelmed cities that claim to be welcoming, exposing the reality that even pro-immigration leaders don't have a solution. With the federal government and states openly defying each other, the country is more divided than ever on immigration. But here's the real problem. Even if the government wanted to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, it's nearly impossible. In the next section, we'll break down why mass deportation is not as easy as it sounds, and why America is stuck in a no-win situation. Number 3. Mass deportation challenges. Some people argue that the solution to America's immigration crisis is simple. Just deport everyone who entered illegally. But here's the harsh reality. Mass deportation is nearly impossible. Right now, there are an estimated 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. Deporting even a fraction of them would require unprecedented resources, funding, and logistics that the government simply doesn't have. The cost alone is staggering. Studies estimate that deporting all undocumented immigrants would cost the U.S. over $200 billion, not including the economic impact of losing millions of workers. And then there's the legal battle. Migrants have rights under U.S. law, and many are entitled to court hearings before being deported. But with the asylum system already overwhelmed, it could take years to process every case. In the meantime, most migrants are released and allowed to stay, sometimes indefinitely. Even when deportation orders are issued, many immigrants simply ignore them. In fact, millions of undocumented immigrants remain in the U.S. despite being ordered to leave. Immigration enforcement agencies are stretched so thin that they can't even track everyone down. And what about the migrants who have been in the U.S. for years? Many have families, children who are U.S. citizens, and deep roots in their communities. Deporting them isn't just logistically difficult, it's also a political and ethical nightmare that no administration has been willing to fully confront. So, if deportation isn't a realistic solution, what's the alternative? Some say securing the border is the only way to stop the crisis from getting worse. But, as we'll see in the next section, America's border security policies are weaker than ever, and it's making the situation even worse. Number 2. Weak border security policies. If the U.S. can't deport millions of undocumented immigrants, then the next logical step would be to secure the border to prevent more from coming in. But here's the problem. Border security policies are weaker than ever, and migrants know it. Right now, Border Patrol agents are completely overwhelmed. With record-breaking numbers of migrants crossing every day, they're struggling to process, detain, or deport people fast enough. In some cases, migrants are released into the U.S. with nothing more than a court date, years in the future. This is why so many are willing to take the risk. Once they're in, the chances of being sent back are low. And it's not just about manpower. Technology and infrastructure are failing too. The border wall, which was supposed to prevent illegal crossings, remains unfinished and ineffective in many areas. Meanwhile, cartels and smugglers have found ways to bypass barriers, using underground tunnels, drones, and even forged documents to get people across. Policy changes have also played a huge role in making the border more vulnerable. In recent years, shifts in immigration enforcement, like ending certain deportation programs and restricting Border Patrol's authority, have signaled to migrants that crossing is easier than before. And they're responding in record numbers. State governments have tried to step in where federal policies have failed, with Texas deploying its own border enforcement officers and building barriers on state land. But immigration is a federal issue, and unless Washington enacts real reforms, the crisis will only continue to spiral out of control. And that brings us to the biggest reason why America's immigration crisis is worse than ever. It's not just about policies or enforcement. It's about global events that are driving the largest migration wave in modern history. Number 1. Global instability. America's immigration crisis isn't just a national issue. It's part of a global migration wave, unlike anything we've ever seen. Millions of people from countries like Venezuela, Haiti, Guatemala, and Afghanistan are fleeing war, economic collapse, and climate disasters, creating an unstoppable surge of migrants heading toward the U.S. Right now, Venezuela's economy is in free fall, with extreme poverty and inflation so high that basic goods are unaffordable. In Haiti, gang violence has spiraled out of control, making daily life a war zone. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, droughts and food shortages caused by climate change are forcing people to migrate for survival. When home is no longer an option, the U.S. becomes the ultimate destination. And here's the issue. The U.S. isn't prepared for this kind of mass migration. The current immigration system was designed to handle tens of thousands of asylum seekers per year, not millions. Border towns are collapsing under the weight of new arrivals, and major cities are running out of housing, jobs, and services to support them. Meanwhile, smugglers and cartels are taking full advantage of the crisis, charging desperate families everything they have for a dangerous journey north. Some never make it. Others arrive only to find a country that's just as overwhelmed as the places they left behind. So where does this all lead? If migration trends continue at this rate, America's immigration system could break completely. The question is, will the government act before it's too late? What do you think? Should the U.S. tighten its borders or find new ways to handle mass migration? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our next video on how immigration reform could change America's future. America's immigration crisis is more than just numbers and policies. It's real people, real struggles, and real consequences. Families risking everything for a better life, cities buckling under the pressure, Leaders arguing while the crisis grows worse by the day. This isn't just a problem, it's a turning point in American history. The truth is, there are no easy answers. Some believe in stricter border control while others push for compassion and reform. But one thing is clear, ignoring the crisis won't make it go away. I pour my heart into making these videos, not just to inform, but to spark conversation, to bring real issues to light that mainstream media often ignores. It takes hours of research, editing, and dedication to bring you the most honest and eye-opening content. If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing to my channel. Your support means everything. It helps me keep making content that challenges the narrative and uncovers the truth. Just one click can make a huge difference. So, what do you think? Is America's immigration crisis out of control, or is there a better way forward? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the more we talk about these issues, the closer we get to real solutions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.